Hello, English learners. Today, I want to share an amazing story with you. This is the story of a man who changed the world. His name was Steve Jobs. Do you have a smartphone? Do you use a computer? Then Steve Jobs changed your life too. But his story is not just about success. It's about failure, dreams, and never giving up. Steve Jobs started with nothing. He was adopted. He dropped out of college. He was even fired from his own company. But he became one of the most famous people in the world. How did he do it? Let's find out together. And while we learn his story, you'll improve your English too. Our story begins on February 24th, 1955, in San Francisco, California. A baby boy was born. But this baby had a difficult start in life. The baby's biological parents could not take care of him, so they decided to give him to new parents. This is called adoption. The baby was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs. They gave him the name Stephen Paul Jobs. Paul Jobs was a mechanic. This means he fixed machines and cars. Clara Jobs was an accountant. She worked with numbers and money. They were not rich people, but they had big hearts full of love. Paul Jobs had a garage where he worked on cars. Little Steve loved to watch his father work. Paul taught Steve something very important. He said, "Steve, if you make something, make it the best you can. Pay attention to every small detail." Let's practice saying this together. Pay attention to every small detail. This lesson stayed with Steve his whole life. Later, when Steve made computers and phones, he always remembered these words. Steve was different from other children. While other kids played with toys, Steve asked questions about everything. How does this work? Why does this machine make that sound? What happens if I change this part? Steve was very curious. Curious means wanting to know about things. His father noticed this curiosity and began teaching Steve about electronics. Electronics are things like radios, televisions, and computers. Together, they spent many hours in the garage, taking apart machines and putting them back together. Let's practice some words together. Repeat after me. Electronics, curious, garage. Steve was smart, but school was boring for him. He finished his work quickly and then had nothing to do. Sometimes he played pranks on his teachers. A prank is a harmless trick. One teacher said, "Steve is too smart for regular classes. He needs something more challenging." But Steve's parents knew their son was special. They supported him and encouraged him to keep learning. When Steve was 10 years old, his family moved to Los Altos, California. This area was becoming famous for technology companies. People called it Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley got its name because many computer companies were built there. Silicon is a material used to make computer parts. In high school, Steve met someone who would become his best friend and business partner. His name was Steve Wozniak. People called him Woz. Steve Wozniak was a genius with electronics. He could build amazing machines from small parts. Steve Jobs was different. He was good at understanding what people wanted and how to sell things to them. Let's practice these words. Genius means a very smart person. Partner means someone you work with. Device means a machine or tool. The two friends worked on projects together. They built a device called a blue box. This device could make free long-distance phone calls. This was illegal, but it showed how creative they were. Steve Jobs later said, "Without the blue box, there would never have been Apple." The two Steves learned something important from working together. Steve Wozniak was the engineer. He built the technology. Steve Jobs was the businessman. He knew how to sell the technology to people. This partnership would change the world. After high school, Steve went to Reed College in Oregon. Reed College was expensive, and Steve's parents were not rich. They used all their savings to send Steve to college. But Steve had a problem. He was bored in college too. The required classes were not interesting to him. He didn't want his parents to waste their money. After just 6 months, Steve made a big decision. He dropped out of college. Dropped out means stopped going to school. "Mom, Dad," Steve told his parents, "I don't want you to spend money on classes that don't help me learn." His parents were worried, but they trusted Steve's decision. Even though Steve dropped out, he continued to attend some classes that interested him. One class was about calligraphy. Calligraphy is the art of beautiful handwriting and fonts. At the time, Steve didn't know why he was interested in calligraphy. It seemed useless for a future in technology. But years later, this class helped Steve create the most beautiful computer fonts in the world. This teaches us something important. Never stop learning, even if you don't understand why something is useful right now. Everything you learn can help you in the future. In 1974, Steve went on a spiritual journey to India. He wanted to find meaning in his life. He wanted to understand himself better. A spiritual journey means looking for answers about life, not just about money or success. In India, Steve learned about meditation and simple living. He learned that sometimes less is more. This idea would later influence all of Apple's products. Let's practice. Spiritual means about the soul and meaning of life. Meditation means quiet thinking to find peace. Influence means to change or affect something. When Steve returned to America, he was different. He had a clearer vision of what he wanted to do with his life. Back in California, Steve reconnected with his friend, Steve Wozniak. Woz had been working on something amazing, a personal computer. In 1976, computers were huge machines that filled entire rooms. Only big companies and universities had computers. Normal people couldn't own one, but Steve Wozniak built a small computer that could fit on a desk. Steve Jobs immediately saw the potential. "Woz," Steve said, "we need to start a company and sell these computers." They started their company in Steve Jobs' parents' garage. They called it Apple Computer. Why Apple? Steve chose this name because he liked apples. The fruit is simple, natural, and friendly. Steve wanted his company to feel the same way. Their first product was called the Apple I. It was just a circuit board. A circuit board means the electronic parts that make a computer work. Steve and Woz built each Apple I computer by hand in the garage. They sold them to computer hobbyists and small electronic stores. The two friends worked day and night. Steve handled the business side, talking to customers, managing money, and planning for the future. Woz handled the technical side, designing and building the computers. The Apple I sold moderately well, but Steve wasn't satisfied. He had a bigger dream. He wanted to create a computer that anyone could use, not just technical experts. Steve's dream was this: every person should have a computer in their home, just like they have a television or a refrigerator. Most people thought this dream was crazy. Why would a normal person need a computer? They asked. But Steve believed in his vision. He never stopped believing. This belief led to their next product, the Apple II. The Apple II was revolutionary. It came with color graphics. It was ready to use right out of the box, and it looked friendly and approachable. When the Apple II was released in 1977, it became a massive success. People loved it because it was easy to use and fun. Apple Computer grew incredibly fast. In just a few years, it became one of the most successful technology companies in the world. Steve Jobs, who was only 25 years old, became a millionaire. But for Steve, the money wasn't the most important thing. What made him happiest was seeing people use his products and enjoy them. By the early 1980s, Apple was a big company with many employees. But Steve Jobs still thought like a dreamer. He wanted to create something even more amazing than the Apple II. One day, Steve visited a research center called Xerox PARC. There, he saw something that would change his life: a computer with a graphical user interface. A graphical user interface means you can use a computer by clicking on pictures and icons instead of typing complicated commands. The computer had a mouse, windows, and icons that you could click on. It was much easier to use than any computer Steve had ever seen. This is the future, Steve thought. Everyone should be able to use computers this easily. Steve returned to Apple with a mission. He wanted to create a computer with this graphical interface, but he wanted to make it perfect. He assembled a team of brilliant engineers and designers. He told them, "We're going to create a computer that's not just functional. It's going to be beautiful and inspiring." Steve was not an easy boss to work for. He demanded perfection in everything. If something wasn't exactly right, he would ask his team to start over. Some people said Steve was too demanding. But Steve believed in something important. If you want to create something truly great, you cannot accept good enough. Steve cared about every tiny detail. He worried about the color of the computer, the shape of the mouse, even the design of the internal parts that users would never see. "Why do you care about parts that no one will see?" people asked him. Steve replied, "We will know they are there. If we want to make something great, every part must be great." Remember the calligraphy class Steve took in college? Now it became useful. Steve used what he learned about beautiful lettering to create the first computer with beautiful fonts. In 1984, Apple launched the Macintosh computer. Steve wanted the launch to be unforgettable, so he created a famous advertisement called 1984. The advertisement showed during the Super Bowl. It suggested that Apple would free people from boring, complicated computers. The Macintosh was revolutionary. It was the first popular computer that normal people could use easily. You could click on icons instead of typing complex commands. The Macintosh changed personal computing forever. Today, all computers use similar graphical interfaces because of Steve's vision. But success came with challenges. Despite the success of the Macintosh, problems were growing inside Apple. Steve Jobs had very strong opinions about everything, and not everyone agreed with him. Steve wanted to control every detail of Apple's products. But other people in the company thought he was too controlling and difficult to work with. Apple's board of directors hired a new CEO named John Sculley. He came from Pepsi-Cola and was supposed to help Apple grow as a business. At first, Steve and John worked well together. Steve even convinced John to join Apple by asking him, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?" But soon, Steve and John began to disagree about Apple's direction. Steve wanted to focus on innovative products. John wanted to focus on making money and pleasing shareholders. In 1985, the disagreement became a battle. Apple's board of directors had to choose Steve Jobs or John Sculley. They chose John Sculley. Steve Jobs was removed from his own company. The company he had started in his parents' garage fired him. Imagine how Steve felt. He was devastated. He was angry. He was heartbroken. The company he loved, the company he had built from nothing, didn't want him anymore. For many people, this would have been the end of the story. But not for Steve Jobs. Later, Steve said, "Getting fired from Apple was the best thing that ever happened to me. It freed me to be creative again." Instead of giving up, Steve decided to start over. He founded a new computer company called NeXT. NeXT focused on making high-performance computers for universities and businesses. NeXT computers were technologically advanced and beautifully designed. They had features that were years ahead of their time. However, they were very expensive, so not many people bought them. At the same time, Steve bought a small computer graphics company from filmmaker George Lucas. This company was called Pixar. Pixar used computers to create animations and special effects for movies. At first, Pixar struggled to make money. They tried selling computer hardware, but it was difficult. But Steve had a vision. He believed that computers could be used to create entire animated movies, not just special effects. Most people in Hollywood thought this idea was impossible. Computer animation will never replace traditional animation, they said. But Steve believed in his vision, just like he had always done. For several years, Pixar worked on developing computer animation technology. They created short animated films to test their ideas and improve their skills. One of their early shorts was called Luxo Jr. It featured a small desk lamp that seemed to come alive. People were amazed by how realistic and emotional computer animation could be. Steve invested his own money to keep Pixar running. Many people told him he was wasting his money. Animation is not profitable, they said. But Steve replied, I'm not just investing in animation. I'm investing in the future of storytelling. Finally, Pixar got their big chance. Disney agreed to work with them to create the world's first fully computer-animated feature film. The movie was called Toy Story. Creating Toy Story was incredibly difficult. Every scene had to be created using computers, which was very slow and expensive. Many people doubted whether the movie would be successful. Steve supported the Pixar team through all the challenges. He encouraged them when they felt discouraged. He pushed them to make the movie better when they wanted to settle for good enough. When Toy Story was released in 1995, it was a massive success. Audiences loved the characters, the story, and the amazing computer animation. Toy Story earned over $373 million worldwide. It proved that computer animation was not just possible, it was magical. After Toy Story, Pixar created many more successful films. A Bug's Life, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, and Cars. Each movie was better than the last. Pixar became the most successful animation studio in the world. At Pixar, Steve applied the same principles he used at Apple. Focus on quality over quantity. Pay attention to every detail. Create products that make people feel happy. Never stop innovating. In 2006, Disney bought Pixar for $7.4 billion. Steve Jobs became Disney's largest individual shareholder. But more importantly, Steve had proven something. When you believe in your vision and work hard to achieve it, amazing things can happen. While Steve was building Pixar, something interesting was happening at Apple. After Steve Jobs left Apple in 1985, the company tried to continue without him. But it wasn't easy. Without Steve's vision and leadership, Apple began to lose its way. The company created many different products, but most of them were not very good. Apple computers became expensive and complicated. The company lost its focus on simplicity and user experience. During this time, Microsoft's Windows operating system became very popular. Windows computers were cheaper than Apple computers, and more software was available for them. Many people began to think that Apple was dying. Technology magazines wrote articles with titles like Apple, the end of an era. Apple's market share dropped to less than 5%. The company was losing money and firing employees. Apple had too many products that were too similar to each other. Customers were confused about which computer to buy. The company had lost Steve's most important principle: simplicity. By 1997, Apple was in serious trouble. The company was close to bankruptcy. Bankruptcy means when a company has no money and might have to close. Apple's board of directors realized they needed help. They needed someone who understood Apple's original vision. They needed Steve Jobs. Apple made a surprising decision. They bought Steve's company, NeXT, for $429 million. This meant Steve Jobs was coming back to Apple after 12 years away. When Steve returned to Apple, he found a company very different from the one he had left. Apple had lost its focus, its passion, and its ability to create great products. But Steve was ready for the challenge. He had learned a lot during his years away from Apple. He was older, wiser, and more experienced. Most importantly, he still believed in his original vision. Technology should be simple, beautiful, and accessible to everyone. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple, he didn't become CEO immediately. He started as an advisor. But soon, it became clear that Apple needed his leadership. One of Steve's first actions was to create a new advertising campaign called Think Different. The campaign celebrated creative people who changed the world. Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, and others. The message was clear. Apple was for people who think differently and want to change the world. Steve made a bold decision. He canceled most of Apple's products. Apple had been making dozens of different computers, but most of them were not very good. We're going to focus on just 4 products, Steve announced. We'll make them incredibly well instead of making many products poorly. Steve created a simple plan: desktop computer for consumers, laptop for consumers, desktop for professionals, laptop for professionals. This simplification helped Apple focus its energy and resources. In 1998, Apple launched the iMac. It was unlike any computer people had ever seen. The iMac came in bright, translucent colors: blue, purple, orange, green, and red. It looked more like a piece of art than a computer. But the iMac wasn't just beautiful. It was also easy to use and reliable. The iMac was a huge success. It showed the world that Apple was back and better than ever. During this time, Steve began working closely with Jonathan Ive, a brilliant British designer. Together, they would create some of the most beautiful products in the world. Jonathan shared Steve's passion for simplicity and attention to detail. Their partnership would define Apple's future. Steve also changed Apple's culture. He encouraged employees to think creatively and take risks. He reminded them that their work could change the world. "We're not just making computers," Steve told his team. "We're creating tools that help people express their creativity and achieve their dreams." Employees who worked with Steve during this period said he was demanding but inspiring. He pushed them to do their best work ever. Steve also made a surprising decision. He partnered with Microsoft, Apple's biggest competitor. At a major Apple conference, Bill Gates appeared on a giant screen to announce that Microsoft would continue making software for Mac computers. Many Apple fans were angry about this partnership, but Steve explained, "We need to focus on what's best for our customers, not on old rivalries." This partnership helped ensure Apple's survival during its recovery period. In 2001, the music industry was changing rapidly. People were downloading music illegally from the internet. CD sales were declining. Record companies were struggling. Steve Jobs saw this chaos as an opportunity. MP3 players existed, but they were difficult to use. They had confusing interfaces and could only hold a few dozen songs. Steve had a vision. What if we could create a device that holds 1,000 songs and fits in your pocket? Apple's team worked intensively to create this device. They wanted it to be simple, beautiful, and intuitive to use. The result was the iPod. It had a sleek white design and a unique scroll wheel that made it easy to navigate through thousands of songs. But Steve knew the iPod needed more than just hardware. It needed an easy way for people to buy music legally. Apple created the iTunes Store, where people could buy individual songs for 99 cents each. This was revolutionary because most online music stores sold entire albums. When the iTunes Store launched in 2003, it sold over 1 million songs in its first week. The iPod became more than just a product. It became a cultural phenomenon. Apple's advertising showed silhouettes of people dancing while wearing white iPod earphones. These ads were simple, energetic, and memorable. The iPod became Apple's most successful product ever. By 2007, Apple had sold over 100 million iPods. Apple created different versions of the iPod for different needs. iPod Mini, which was smaller and colorful. iPod Nano, which was ultra-thin. iPod Shuffle, which was tiny and inexpensive. Each version maintained Apple's commitment to simplicity and great design. The iPod transformed Apple from a computer company into a consumer electronics company. It brought Apple into millions of homes around the world. Steve's vision was coming true. Apple was creating products that enhanced people's lives in meaningful ways. Music is deeply personal, Steve explained. The iPod lets you carry your entire music collection wherever you go. It's your soundtrack to life. The success of the iPod prepared Apple for its next revolutionary product. In 2007, smartphones existed, but they were not very good. Most phones had small screens, physical keyboards, and complicated interfaces. The most popular smartphone was the BlackBerry, which was mainly used for email by business people. Steve Jobs had a different vision. He wanted to create a device that was 3 products in one: a mobile phone, a music player like the iPod, an internet browser. Creating the iPhone was incredibly difficult. Apple's team had to solve many technical problems. How to make a touchscreen that was accurate and responsive. How to create a battery that would last all day. How to fit all the technology into a thin, elegant device. Steve was involved in every detail of the iPhone's development. He tested hundreds of prototypes. He insisted that the phone should have no physical keyboard, just a touchscreen. Many people at Apple thought this was a mistake. People need physical buttons, they argued. But Steve believed that a touchscreen would give users more flexibility and make the phone easier to use. On January 9th, 2007, Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone at a major technology conference in San Francisco. Steve walked onto the stage wearing his trademark black turtleneck and blue jeans. He began with these words: "Today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products. The first is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. The third is a breakthrough internet communications device." He paused, then smiled and said, "These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device, and we are calling it iPhone." The audience erupted in applause. They had never seen anything like the iPhone before. Steve demonstrated the iPhone's revolutionary features: multi-touch screen that responded to gestures, visual voicemail, built-in camera, internet browsing with Safari, iTunes music player, Google Maps. When the iPhone was released in June 2007, Apple's advertising claimed, "iPhone changes everything." This wasn't just marketing, it was the truth. People waited in line for hours to buy the first iPhone. The excitement was incredible. The iPhone didn't just compete with existing phones, it made them obsolete. Within a few years, every smartphone manufacturer was trying to copy the iPhone's design and features. Before the iPhone, most people had never used a touchscreen. After the iPhone, touchscreens became standard on almost all electronic devices. In 2008, Apple launched the App Store. which allowed third-party developers to create applications for the iPhone. The App Store created an entire new industry. Millions of people around the world began creating apps, from games to productivity tools to social media platforms. The iPhone changed not just technology, but human behavior. People began using their phones for everything, taking photos, navigation, social media, shopping, learning, and entertainment. Steve Jobs had created a device that became an extension of people's daily lives. For many years, technology companies had tried to create successful tablet computers. Most of these tablets were heavy, complicated, and expensive. They never became popular. Steve Jobs believed he could create a tablet that people would actually want to use. His vision was simple. It should be easier to use than a laptop, but more powerful than a phone. Apple spent several years developing the iPad. They had to create a new operating system, design new apps, and solve many technical challenges. Steve was personally involved in every aspect of the iPad's development. He tested different screen sizes, studied how people held the device, and ensured that the battery would last all day. In January 2010, Steve Jobs introduced the iPad. He sat comfortably in a chair on stage, holding the sleek device. "What this device does is extraordinary," Steve explained. "It's the best way to browse the web, read email, enjoy photos, watch videos, listen to music, play games, and read books." The iPad had several revolutionary features: large, high-resolution touchscreen, thin and lightweight design, only 1.5 pounds, 10-hour battery life, instant-on capability, thousands of available apps. Initially, many technology critics were skeptical about the iPad. They asked, "Why do we need a device that's bigger than a phone but smaller than a laptop?" Some critics even made jokes about the iPad's name, but consumers loved the iPad. Apple sold 1 million iPads in just 28 days, faster than the iPhone or any other Apple product. The iPad revolutionized many industries. In education, teachers used iPads to make lessons more interactive and engaging. In healthcare, doctors used iPads to access patient records and medical information quickly. In business, companies used iPads for presentations and mobile productivity. In media, newspapers and magazines created beautiful digital editions for the iPad. In art, artists discovered they could create amazing digital artwork using the iPad. The iPad also became popular with families. Children could use educational apps, while parents could read books, watch movies, and stay connected. Steve explained his philosophy about the iPad. Technology should be invisible. When you're using the iPad, you shouldn't think about the technology. You should just focus on what you want to accomplish. By 2010, Apple had created a complete ecosystem of products that worked seamlessly together. iPhone for mobile computing, iPad for portable computing, Mac computers for professional work, iPod for music, iTunes for content, App Store for applications. Steve's vision of integrated technology was becoming reality. In 2003, Steve Jobs received devastating news. Doctors told him he had a rare form of pancreatic cancer. Cancer is a serious disease where harmful cells grow in the body. Pancreatic cancer is particularly dangerous because it's difficult to detect and treat. At first, Steve tried to treat his cancer using alternative methods. He changed his diet, tried herbal remedies, and hoped he could heal naturally. Steve had always believed in controlling his own destiny, and he wanted to beat cancer his own way. Over time, people began to notice that Steve was losing weight and looked tired. But he continued to work with the same intensity as always. In June 2005, Steve gave a famous speech to graduates at Stanford University. Even though he was battling cancer, he shared 3 important life lessons. First lesson: connect the dots. You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. Second lesson: love and loss. Sometimes life hits you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. Third lesson: death. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. He ended his speech with these famous words: stay hungry, stay foolish. This speech became one of the most inspiring speeches ever given. It showed Steve's wisdom and his determination to live fully despite his illness. As Steve's illness progressed, he had surgery and other treatments. Sometimes he felt better, sometimes worse. But he never stopped working on new Apple products. Steve believed that his work at Apple was his most important contribution to the world. He wanted to create products that would continue to inspire people long after he was gone. In 2007, while fighting cancer, Steve introduced the iPhone. In 2010, still battling the disease, he introduced the iPad. Steve's dedication to his work, even during his illness, showed his incredible strength and passion. By 2010, Steve Jobs had become more than just a CEO. He was a global icon, a symbol of innovation and determination. However, behind the scenes, his health was deteriorating. The battle with pancreatic cancer that had begun years earlier was catching up to him. Despite his illness, Steve refused to slow down. He often said, "You only get one life. Make it count." Every day, he pushed himself to do his best work. He believed in living with purpose, no matter how much time he had left. Under Steve's leadership, Apple had reached new heights. By 2011, it became one of the most valuable companies in the world. Millions of people owned iPhones, iPads, and Mac computers. Apple wasn't just a company anymore, it was a lifestyle. Steve's vision went beyond creating products. He wanted to build an ecosystem where everything worked together seamlessly. For example, you could take a picture on your iPhone and see it on your Mac instantly. You could start an email on your iPad and finish it on your laptop. He believed technology should make life easier, not more complicated. This idea became the foundation of Apple's success. While Steve was busy transforming the world, he also cherished his family. He was married to Lauren Powell Jobs, a strong and intelligent woman who supported him through all his challenges. Together they had 3 children, Reed, Aaron, and Eve. Steve also had a daughter, Lisa, from a previous relationship. He wasn't always the perfect father, especially in his early years. But over time, he worked hard to build stronger relationships with his kids. Steve often told his children, "Don't settle for anything less than what you love. Follow your passions, and the rest will fall into place." Despite his demanding schedule, he made time for family dinners and simple moments. He loved walking in the garden with Lauren, discussing ideas and reflecting on life. Even as Steve's health worsened, he kept thinking about the future. He wasn't just focused on the next product, he was focused on the next generation. Steve wanted Apple to remain innovative even after he was gone. He worked closely with his team, sharing his ideas and mentoring them. One of his most famous quotes was, "Innovation is saying no to 1,000 things." This meant focusing only on what truly mattered and ignoring distractions. In 2011, Apple introduced Siri, a virtual assistant that could understand and respond to spoken commands. Siri was another example of Steve's vision for the future technology that felt natural and intuitive. Steve wanted technology to feel like an extension of the human mind. Siri was just the beginning of a new era of artificial intelligence, showing how far Apple could go. In August 2011, Steve made a difficult decision. He stepped down as Apple's CEO, knowing his health would no longer allow him to lead the company. He wrote a heartfelt letter to the Apple board and employees saying, "I have always said that if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know. Unfortunately, that day has come." Steve chose Tim Cook, his trusted colleague, as his successor. He believed Tim shared his values and vision for the company. Although Steve stepped down, he remained closely involved with Apple's projects. He spent his remaining days ensuring that Apple would continue to thrive. In his final months, Steve spent more time with his family. He often talked about the meaning of life and the importance of leaving a legacy. He said, "Being the richest man in the cemetery doesn't matter to me. What matters is that I've done something wonderful for the world." Steve loved to sit in his garden, surrounded by nature. He found peace in the simple things, watching the sunrise, listening to music, and holding hands with Lauren. On October 5th, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. His death was a global loss, and millions of people mourned him. Apple announced his death with a simple tribute on their website, featuring a portrait of Steve and his name. Tributes poured in from around the world: technology leaders, politicians, artists, and countless fans mourning the loss of someone who had profoundly shaped the digital age. After his passing in 2011, Steve Jobs' influence didn't fade. It grew even stronger. Apple continued to innovate, releasing products like the Apple Watch and AirPods, and pushing boundaries with technology. But Steve's legacy isn't just about technology. It's about the way he made people think. He taught us to challenge the status quo. Steve always believed in questioning the ordinary and striving for the extraordinary. He taught us to focus on quality. He once said, "Be a yardstick of quality." Some people aren't used to an environment where excellence is expected. He pushed himself and his team to deliver their best work every time. He taught us to stay hungry and stay foolish. These words, which he borrowed from a magazine he loved, became his life motto. They remind us to keep learning, dreaming, and taking risks. Steve Jobs didn't just create products. He created tools that changed how people live, work, and communicate. Think about it. The iPhone made the world more connected than ever before. The Mac gave artists, writers, and creators a platform to express themselves. The iPad transformed education, making learning more interactive and accessible. Steve's ideas reached every corner of the globe. Millions of people now use technology not just for work, but to tell their stories, explore their creativity, and chase their dreams. Steve's life was filled with ups and downs, but he always found a way to turn challenges into opportunities. Here are some of the most important lessons his journey teaches us. First, believe in yourself. Even when people doubted him, Steve trusted his vision. He showed us that self-belief is the foundation of success. Second, think big. Steve didn't just want to create products. He wanted to change the world. He believed in setting ambitious goals and working tirelessly to achieve them. Third, never stop learning. Steve was always curious and eager to learn new things. He showed us that growth comes from being open to new ideas and experiences. Fourth, follow your passion. Steve's greatest successes came from doing what he loved. He proved that when you follow your passion, work becomes more meaningful. Steve Jobs once said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." And he was right. Steve Jobs' life was proof that one person, armed with passion, vision, and determination, can make a lasting impact on the world. His story isn't just about success. It's about resilience, creativity, and the power of believing in yourself, no matter where you are in life. Steve's journey reminds us that it's never too late to dream big and make a difference. So let's take inspiration from Steve Jobs' extraordinary life and remember, our time is limited, but our potential is infinite. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Steve Jobs' remarkable life. I hope his story inspires you to pursue your dreams and never give up on what you believe in. Remember, as Steve once said, stay hungry, stay foolish, keep learning English, keep dreaming big, and who knows, maybe you'll be the next person to change the world.